Good day, everybody. My name is Peter Rankin. I'm a 4L evening student at University of the Columbia Law School. I am here with Ms. Barnes Harley, who is a partner at GT Law Firm, and she focuses on labor and employment law. And I'd like to start out by asking you if you could just give us a little bit, introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your education, professional history, and how you connected to UDC Law.
Good afternoon, and thank you for interviewing me. This is truly an honor and a pleasure. As you stated, my name is Johnine Barnes Harley. I am a shareholder and chair of the Washington, D.C. Labor and Employment Practice Group at Greenberg Traurig. I first became connected to UDC Law when I was in part of my professional career. I was chair of the Public Employee Relations Board in Washington, D.C., which is essentially the local board that governs disputes and complaints between the local unions and the city employees. And through my work with PERB, I then became connected to UDC and worked with them as Labor Council on a couple matters. I then became connected with UDC Law Foundation through a UDC Law grad who I have known for quite some time, and connected with him as he was going through his journey of re-entering the workforce, and just talking with him about different professional avenues that he could take and giving more of a practical perspective on how valuable your law degree can be and the impact that you can make professionally and socially. He then asked me to serve on the board for the foundation because I have always had a passion for helping students. So like I always meet with law students, undergrad students, and give them my perspective, because I took a lot of perspectives when I was making my decision on what to do professionally, and so I try to give back to others.
Very cool. Thank you for that. How about your education and a little bit of your professional history?
So I am a double graduate from Case Western Reserve University. I graduated with a BA in political science and economics from Case Western Reserve University, and graduated with my JD from Case Western Reserve University School of Law. I have been practicing for 28 years. My entire practice has been in big law. However, prior to coming to big law, I did internships in City Hall. I worked on Capitol Hill. I worked in a corporation. I did lots of things and still do. I don't call them jobs, but a lot of my volunteer work is with nonprofits. And so although I've worked in big law all of my professional career, my personal and community involvement has taken me through various industries.
That's really great. And I heard you mention that you had some internships and externships. Could you talk about how those impacted your career and potentially what advice you could give to some students about those internships and externships?
So they impact my career a great deal. It told me what I didn't want to do. It told me what I did want to do. And so when I was in undergrad, I'm from a small town, Steubenville, Ohio, and going back home over the summers would have resulted in me either working in a steel mill or working at either the university or in retail. And so after my first summer, I purposed my following summers to make sure that I got experiences in different areas where I thought that I might want to work after graduating from undergrad. And also it helped to not have to go back to a small town in Steubenville. I did an externship program with Ford Motor Company, working in their trucking division in Ohio. I worked for Councilman Coates, who was the chair of the Cleveland City Council. I worked for a law firm doing mainly clerk type work, and actually worked in estates and trusts, an area that I would never practice in because I realized after I did that I did not want to do that. I also did a program, the Washington Center program, where I went to school at night and worked on Capitol Hill, and I was an intern for Congressman Stokes. Between that job and my work with Councilman Coates, I realized I did not want to go into politics. Even though I was a poli-sci major in undergrad, I quickly learned that was not, I didn't have the temperament for it. I was not the happy person to everyone at all times, even though if I was not happy with you. So I quickly learned that I did not want to go into politics. And working at Ford sort of solidified that I had an interest in labor and employment, because growing up in a steel mill town, I've always had an interest in labor and employment. My father worked at Weirton Steel, which was one of the first ESOP employee-owned plants. And so working there always gave me a different perspective, because I could, he worked his way up through management until he from a line worker to management. And so seeing how his career changed, I was interested in seeing how that worked. So my father went from, being friends to being his friend's boss on many occasions. And so that was really interesting to me. And so that was one of the things that made me have an interest in labor and employment law. And then working at Ford sort of solidified that. And so when I went to law school, so I determined I did want to go to law school and didn't want to work in politics or go on the Hill or anything. I went to law school, and my first year, I did an internship at Malizer Noble, which was a labor and employment boutique firm, regional boutique firm in outside of Cleveland area. And that sort of solidified that's what I wanted to do. Now, when I started my second year, I clerked for a full service firm, because my mentor told me, I know this is what you think you want to do, but you need to at least experience other things. And so I went and clerked for a full service firm, which is where I ended up working when I graduated. And when I first started practicing, I actually did securities litigation and labor and employment. And after a year of that, I realized I did not want to do securities litigation, although I do still do some securities litigation, but it's mainly from an employment perspective. And I knew that I wanted to do labor and employment.
That's really interesting that you talk about the sort of shift in what you wanted to do, because as an evening student, and I've been in the working world for 15 years now, I still often feel like I don't know what I want to do. So my mother used to joke that she was always excited when she was 40, because she would figure out what she wanted to do with her life, and then she turned 40, she changed careers because she didn't actually know. But that's
and just so you know, it's okay to not know what you want to do. I mean, there are some days where I love when people ask me the question, if you weren't practicing law, what would you be doing? Because I actually think that maybe at some point in time I might end up doing those things. So,
that would be interesting to hear. But you mentioned working in big law and talking about working for the firms that you worked for, and so how do you think that as you know, UDC is a social justice focused law school. Can you talk about how social justice and employment labor law interact, and also how those interact with big law firms?
Well, so I will tell you, from a labor and employment perspective, social justice interacts a lot. We have seen that probably in the last 5 years, mainly at least since the pandemic, how social justice interacts with labor and employment laws, because a lot of people are feeling like either they don't want to work for someone who they don't believe espouses the values that they believe in, or they want to bring their values and their social callings into the workplace. And so social justice and labor and employment have sort of clashed and have become more intertwined because, there used to be a time where people would just show up to work and all they were doing was working for a paycheck. I think that has changed a lot of per generation, I will say. I think that the younger generations really do focus on what is the social impact their employer is having and whether or not they believe that they have the same values and beliefs as their employer from a social perspective and what they're able to give back. Whereas I think that the baby boomer and Gen Xers, we worked for a paycheck. And so you see social justice and labor employment very much so intertwined now.
Okay, that's really interesting, and that actually leads into my next question about how students at UDC, how can they incorporate their social justice focused law education into a corporate practice?
Well, so I will tell you, I think that students at UDC have a lot to offer in corporate practice because you have not only the legal experience now that you've gone through law school, but you also have practical business experience. And with the focus of UDC being a social justice law school and focusing on courses that help to advocate for social justice, it gives you a different perspective coming in, because having that perspective along with practical work experience, along with a legal background, it gives you more of a true perspective of what actually goes on in a corporation, as opposed to just having that legal, so if I come to you with an issue, instead of going through the IRAC form, I don't know, do you all even follow IRAC anymore? Okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay. It's been a while since I've been in law school, but as opposed to just going through the IRAC form and answering the questions and looking at the case law, and you all have a different perspective because you have more of the practical perspective. So yes, this may be the answer on paper, but in reality, here's where society is on this issue, or here's where a corporation may be on this issue, and it's not as black and white. And so being able to mesh those different views into your analysis provides you a better perspective, honestly, I would say, than some law students who have no practical experience, have no perspective on what is going on outside of just legal theories. If they don't know how legal theories are applied practically, they don't have that perspective. And so UDC students do have an advantage in that they have the practical work experience, they have the practical legal application experience, and then now you have the legal training to go with it.
That's good to hear, and it's good that you mentioned some of the application of things, because I've read a lot in the news lately that labor issues are, as they often come up with different election cycles, they're back in the news. And the Michigan legislature just repealed the at-will statute, and the federal minimum wage is something that always pops up. I mean, I think since I've been lobbying, the federal minimum wage has been an issue that people ask me about, even though I don't lobby on it, but they ask me about where my organization stands on it. And it's been that way since I started lobbying. So for law students who are interested in following those trends and learning for those trends so they can apply what they've learned to the policy side of things, where do you think that they should look for the trends in labor and employment law?
So I will tell you that the news, unfortunately, the news is a good place to find it. And I'd say unfortunately, because sometimes we don't know if news is generated for, I guess, site only, as opposed for information. And a lot of that just has to do with because we have so many news streams that you got to keep, something has to be in the news, constantly. You have to have something that's going to pop up on your website, So the days of you just getting a print paper and that, was the news. And so you knew that the really big and important issues were hitting print are gone. So, you get an overflow of things. And so, but that's good labor and employment wise, because there are so many different moving parts.
Yeah.
And so it gives you more of a sense of the pulse of where we are as a society, which in fact impacts corporate America, because, for me, I'm not really paying attention to, and this is just me, I'm not really paying attention to what people are wearing to work, because
Mhm.
I come to work, I dress in a suit, I dress in that. But I see the news and I see, oh yes, this is the trend, the graphic t-shirts, the, making a statement in, what you wear and things that sort. And now I know, because I've looked at the news and I see this, because it's not something I'm thinking of, that these are a lot of issues that employers are going to face. How do you impose a dress code upon your
Interesting.
workforce such that your other employees are not offending other employees? How do you make sure that you are not bringing vendors into your workplace who may be offensive to other employees or workers who are in that place? And so keeping track of the news and just hearing that will give you sort of a pulse and temperature of the issues that are percolating in society. And ultimately, society is the workforce. And so that's a good place to find it. I also still believe shouldn't say this out loud, I'm a tree killer. I believe in hard books. I believe in paper. And so, a good book, a lot of books that will give you history of how the workforce has gone and changed over time are very good to find out issues, because one thing you will see, it may be different in the sense of, now we're getting a lot of our news off of the internet, and you get, apps and things of that sort, but you will find out the issues tend to be cyclical. And so knowing the history of labor in the United States is also an important thing.
Oh, that's interesting. And I'm glad you said that about books, because except for my law school books, which I find to be incredibly heavy and I don't want to schlep around with me everywhere, I generally am a big fan of the old school, pick it up, read it book. There's something about the feel that just makes it all that much more enjoyable. And on the notion of sort of education and where to get information, other than labor law and employment law classes, what would you recommend students interested in employment law focus on in law school?
I always tell, and this is just not labor employment students, I tell the students that in UDC has a great clinical program, so you all are right where you need to be to take a clinic. I think that clinics, regardless if you want to do litigation or not, that it's a good training area for you when you're practicing law, because it helps you in learning how to interact with lay persons, because you have a client that you have to interact with. You have to talk to that client. You have to explain to them the issues. You have to then interact with opposing counsel. So it helps you with interacting with lawyers and learning how to practice law civilly, and, how you can, take away certain information from things that are said and things that are read. It also helps you with the practice of law and informing the issues and being able to present your argument in the most effective way. So I think that clinics are a good place, and those are all the things that you need with labor and employment law. You need to know how to be able to interact with your client, who's a corporate client, but at the same time, give them practical advice, because I can't just say, change this policy because this is what the law says. No, we have to talk about, how do you implement this policy? How do you change the culture of your workforce? Because you have to work in how you're rolling things out. That means that you have to know how to interact with people who are not lawyers and who are not corporate people. And you get that by doing a clinic when you have clients that you have to interact with.
Yeah, it sounds almost like you have to be kind of an educator and a coach and a cheerleader all in one when you consult with clients. And that's something I remember from my clinical experience was, I had to go in there and I had to yell and praise and teach all at the same time to make sure that my clients understood what was going on, and that, they should just really do what I tell them, because I'm right.
Well, if that was the case, you wouldn't have a job. So just consider job security.
Very true. Yeah. So I noticed that you were recognized as one of Law Dragon's 500 top leading lawyers in America, and as a leader in the U.S. corporate employment U.S. corporate employment law area, and focusing specifically on client services. And I know you just mentioned the client services. What piece of advice would you give a UDC law student on client interaction and client services, and how to interact with clients, especially the clients that are maybe a little bit more difficult to work with, or a little less trusting of lawyers?
I would actually recommend that you get involved with a nonprofit. I think that when you work with nonprofits, it gives you a good insight into, I don't want to say this, the struggle, but sort of how you have to strike a balance between the goal that you're trying to achieve and the limited structure or the bureaucratic structure in which you're trying to achieve that goal. And so with nonprofits, we know that sometimes the cause gets lost in just the grant writing proposal form, the budgetary constraints, the legal implications that may arise from you implementing a program. But you still want to keep going forward with the mission of the organization. And so having those two sort of areas meet when you work with a nonprofit is a good way to sort of see what struggles clients have. Because from a labor and employment perspective, particularly from depending upon the industry that you're in, it could be an industry where, for instance, a tech company, human capital is not there. That's not where they're making their money. They're making their money on the technology, but then you need the human capital to make the technology. So how do you balance that, where you're trying to get to and the constraints that you have? So you want to keep, a workforce that is agile, knows the area, able to do the things that you need to get done so that you produce a product that you can monetize. But then you have to balance, and I will tell you, tech is definitely one of those areas. It is mainly millennials and Gen Zers who are able to navigate the tech area, but yet and still they have a hard time working within the corporate confines. And so being able to strike the balance between those two, which you will see when you volunteer for nonprofits, is sort of kind of how that will help you to better understand what clients are going through and the balance that they have to make in order to achieve their strategic goals. And so I would say that, from a labor and employment perspective, if you can volunteer at a nonprofit, and I know UDC Law is focused on social justice, so I'm sure that there are lots of nonprofits that are present on the campus. But if you can work in a nonprofit, that will help to give you a good perspective on client services and how to provide excellent client services, because you're able to learn and understand how you have to balance the I don't want to say the things, but you have to balance the pieces that are pulling on corporate objectives.
Okay, that's interesting, and I work in nonprofits, so I can totally agree with that. You learn a lot about how to balance everything and how to keep things moving even when they seem to stall. So my last question for you is a little bit on the lighter side, although I don't think anything in law school is actually on the lighter side. But so whenever I talk to experienced lawyers, they always have a story about their favorite law school class, whether it was the professor or the subject matter, or they found out that they really loved law about underwater basket weaving, whatever it happens to be. So my question is, what was your favorite class in law school and why? And then to take that to a little more serious side, how could you apply what you learned in that class to your practice now?
So I will tell you, and I keep bringing this up, and it's so appropriate because UDC Law is a great clinical program. But my favorite class was my trial clinic that I took. And the clinic that I took was with Professor McElhaney, John McElhaney. He is a renowned trial lawyer in teaching trial clinics. He was a professor at Case Western Reserve when I was there. And that was my favorite class. And the reason being is because everything that we thought we learned from law school and we were going to apply in this clinic, he like debunked it. Like, no, you're not going to do this. You don't start out by arguing, the case that you're worried about, because, you're worried about making sure that you distinguish the case that is not directly on point. And you just leave that to the side. You only bring that up only if your opposing side realizes it, because you don't know if your opposing side is going to realize. So you get up and you talk about loudly what's in your favor. And so that was sort of my favorite class, because although I enjoyed law school, I am a methodical thinker. I am an African American woman in a country that deemed that African Americans were not even a full person, and it's in paper, it's written down. So I, always did have some, looking at the law side eye, like, how is this so? And so when I took my clinic with Professor McElhaney, he actually explained why the side eye was warranted, but also show why the side eye helps progress, and how you can use law to make progress and make change and have a just and fair outcome.
Okay, that's actually a very inspiring anecdote. I think it's interesting that your professor, and I think I had with the professor saying, like, what you've learned is not what you actually need to know, experience in clinic, and it was very eye-opening, and it took me out of sort of the world of the academic law where we could sit and debate and everything was theoretical. Those are all the questions I have, and I really appreciate you being on with me today. I'd like to thank you on behalf of all of the students at UDC who I'm sure will watch this, and I'd like to thank you for all the work you do on behalf of UDC Law Foundation. You do great work there, and the foundation does great work. And again, thank you for talking with me today.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.